Pensacola Navy Yard dated back to December 1825, when President John Quincy Adams approved the establishment of a Navy Yard and depot at Tartar Point on the western shore of Pensacola Bay near Fort Barrancas. Construction moved slowly, but by 1850, an observer noted that it was one of the largest and most beautiful yards in the country. Due to the distance from the Pensacola Navy Yard to the city of Pensacola, the U.S. Navy leased lots outside the base to construction workers and civilian yard employees, all with the clear understanding that they were residing on Navy property and might be asked to leave. To the west stood the village of Warrington, named for the first commandant of the Navy Yard. To the north stood the village of Woolsey, named for the second commandant. I am standing in front of the west wall of the old Navy shipyard. Behind me you'll see the gate that led to the village of Warrington. On the north wall there was a second gate that led to the village of Woolsey. During World War I, the Navy received money to build hangars at the air station, and a hangar was built that went beyond the shipyard into the town of Warrington. The Pensacola Navy Yard eventually encompassed nearly 80 acres, all surrounded by two tall brick walls to provide protection from ground attack. Gates at the north wall and the west wall provided access. Over the years, the fortunes of the yard ebbed and flowed with strategic requirements, wars, and expedition. The yard was placed in an inactive status in the early 1900s, and a 1906 hurricane devastated its facilities. In October 1910, the yard was officially closed as part of a cost-saving measure, and in 1912, a U.S. Navy collier returned to strip the yard of everything usable. Even the lights were turned out, prompting one Pensacola sailing master to note it was the first time since 1868 that he had not seen lights along the landings at the shipyard. The citizens of Pensacola did not know that all of naval aviation was being transferred here permanently. A brief article appeared in the newspaper on December 18, 1913, but the press and the public were under the impression that it was just a temporary summer assignment, like many had been completed in the past. Finally, on January 3, 1914, the monumental news broke that Pensacola was designated as the permanent aeronautical center of the United States Navy. Events unfolded rapidly. Less than 2 weeks later, on January 20, 1914, the USS Mississippi, an antiquated battleship, and the USS Orion, a sea-worn collier, arrived off of Pensacola. Aboard was nearly all of the entire Naval Flying Corps, comprised of 7 officers, 23 men, 7 aircraft, portable hangars, and other gear to establish the U.S. Navy's first naval air station and flying school. While the Naval Aviation Camp in Annapolis was relocating to Pensacola, 2 Marine Corps officers, First Lieutenant Bernard Smith, Naval Aviator No. 6, and Second Lieutenant William McIlvaine, Naval Aviator No. 12, were in Puerto Rico. They had with them a Curtiss flying boat and a hydro aeroplane for combined operations with the Marine Advanced Base Brigade. They would arrive in Pensacola in February 1915 at the end of these exercises. At this point, the first Marine officer designated as a naval aviator, First Lieutenant Alfred Cunningham, who qualified as an aviator in 1913, was no longer assigned to flight duties. Assigned as commanding officer of the U.S. Mississippi and the Naval Aeronautics Station was Lieutenant Commander Henry Rum Mustin, Naval Aviator No. 11. Lieutenant Commander Mustin maneuvered the USS Mississippi into Pensacola Harbor and, without the help of a pilot or tug, brought her alongside the dock of the shipyard. What he found ashore shocked him. The yard was in terrible condition, suffering from years of neglect and unrepaired hurricane damage. Lieutenant Commander Mustin wrote home that the whole place was in scandalous condition, appearing as if it had been abandoned 50 years ago and was being used as a dump. He was also surprised to find out that he was the mayor of the 2 towns, Warrington and Woolsey, located outside the yard's brick walls. But he was still upbeat, and he noted the fine possibilities for the yard once it had been cleared of debris and repaired. The establishment of a flying beach, Critical to the launching and recovery of the aviators' flying boats and hydro airplanes was the highest priority for the aviators. Although weeks of strenuous effort would be required before the flying beach was considered suitable for flight operations, the naval aviators immediately began offloading their disassembled airplanes. To protect these fragile flying machines from the elements, the aviators set up white canvas tents with cinder floors and built wooden ramps scrounged from derelict heavy timbers that led to the water's edge. Lieutenant Towers, who had about 150 hours of flight time, more flight time than any other naval aviator, was placed in charge of the flying school. This flying school exists to this day and is known as Aviation Pre-Flight Indoctrination at Naval Aviation Schools Command aboard Naval Air Station, Pensacola. In January 1914, the Pensacola Navy Yard was redesignated as a Naval Aeronautics Station. In December 1917, the station's title was administratively changed to Naval Air Station Pensacola, as it is still known today. NAS Pensacola's official insignia is that of J. Gosling, created in 1931 by Mr. Edward Collins, a draftsman in the Overhaul and Repair Department. Predating the creation of Donald Duck by nearly 3 years, a young duck is selected to represent a flight student's certain degree of foolishness and amusement in learning how to fly. Meanwhile, preparation for the naval aviators' first flight at Pensacola continued at breakneck speed. On January 20th, 1914, an article appeared in the Pensacola Journal inviting the public to observe and perhaps even participate in the first flights to be held in approximately 2 weeks' time. On February 2nd, 1914, Pensacola awoke to ideal flight conditions. Light winds with morning temperatures in the 40s and afternoon temperatures in the 60s. From one of the canvas tent hangars, beach crews pushed a wooden-hulled Curtiss F-boat, designated the C-5, down a ramp into the frigid waters of Pensacola Bay. Scrambling aboard was Lieutenant John Towers, officer in charge of the flying school, and young flight student Ensign Godfrey D. Chevalier. They started their engine and then gently maneuvered their flying boat out into the open water. Applying power, they soon accelerated into the air, breaking the bay's icy grip at about 9:30 a.m. Choosing to stay safely close to the air station, they commenced a leisurely climb to 1,000 feet and flew for 20 minutes before returning to alight gently on the water. The Pensacola Journal remarked in the next morning's paper that the machines in the air look like gigantic buzzards and make a noise plainly available on the ground as the airmen pass over. The cradle of naval aviation had been baptized. Pensacola's Naval and Marine Corps aviators soon began flying their awe-inspiring flying machines everywhere around the local area, to the thrill and delight of the Pensacolians, who now had a ringside seat to aeronautical displays enjoyed by very few people in the world.